Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Things Considered. Tonight, I want to do another video, and I came across something that explains a little of what I've been trying to get across. I think this explains it a little better than I could have. And it's the article says, Rich and Poor, Opportunities and Challenges in an Age of Disruption. Now, when we talk about rich and poor and how a city becomes rich and what happens to the poor, I wanted to read you this particular article. You have to bear with me here because I'm trying to get my cord from falling off. It's my power cord. Anyway, what was said here is, before the 1800s, just about everybody was poor. You had royalty. You had these huge landowners, but they were a tiny, tiny minority. And just about everyone lived in poverty. And everyone lived very much wedded to their land. We owned property back in the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s. We had property, and we were very close to the property we had. This was the entire history of humanity. There was some huge changes, of course. Agriculture. What happened was that mostly people were hunters and gatherers before agriculture. Before there were stores where you could go and pick up your vegetables, you had to go out in the garden and you had to shoot them. And then, when agriculture started, food production was then brought to the people rather than vice versa. Instead of us going out looking for food, we could just go to the store and it would be brought to us. We didn't have to have a garden. We can go to the store and get canned vegetables. Let's see here. And then when agriculture started, food production was then brought to the people rather than vice versa. People didn't go out looking for food anymore. There were places where they knew that a steady supply of food could be created. But wealth was also tied to the land, and those who controlled the land controlled much of the world's wealth. And the difficulty was in shipping or moving anything. You had the land, you had the products made by the land, but you couldn't steadily get them anywhere. It would take you forever to maybe put stuff on a wagon and make it go places. If you lived on a river, you had ferries, maybe you had some rafts. You could take some of your goods and move them, but for the most part, that wasn't happening. And the difficulty in shipping or moving anything, things, ideas, and people, it was very difficult to move anything. So there wasn't very much trade. And so the cost of moving things really mattered and shaped the way societies formed. In the 17th century, only 3,000 European ships sailed to Asia. In the 18th century, for the next 100 years, about 6,000 ships sailed. It was very difficult to move anything. Now, around the 1800 to 1820, some very important things happened. And the two most important ones that most historians will look at are the Industrial Revolution and the steam power. So, around 1820, steam power allowed movement of goods, and the movement of goods fueled industrialization, trade, and economic growth. But at that time, also was the start of one of the great economists, Deirdre McCloskey, who talked about right around that time, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and steam, you had the beginning of what she called the Great Divergence. meaning that certain areas, especially Europe and the United States, grew rich very, very quickly. She talks about the formation of the so-called Bourgeoisie, and the Bourgeoisie were former peasants who were close enough to royalty that they wanted to live like that, which means that you had people that were peasants or people that were not, they were like the low-income people who strove to be more like the rich. They wanted to have materials. They were materialistic in thought. And so, as she sees it, the development of the Bourgeoisie as a very important development because they were the precursors to the middle class. The Bourgeoisie people, and I may be pronouncing that wrong, and if I am, you can tell me in a comment, but the Bourgeoisie people were people that were low income, but had enough forward thinking to want to be more like the rich. So they moved up the ladder. They weren't content on staying poor. So they moved up the ladder and they became what is known as middle class. Now in the 2 centuries from the 1820s until now, what happened was that the availability of goods, of services, they just exploded. It wasn't a little bit of a change. It was just a huge amount of change. It was just huge amounts of change. Because before 1820, people were born and they died in pretty much the same world. The world from the time they were born to the time they died did not change very much. But starting in the 1820s, the world started changing very, very quickly. 2 centuries ago, 4 out of 5 U.S. adults worked to grow food for their families. Now, one farmer feeds 300 people. So the reason I am talking about this is because we have to put these things in perspective. We have to put the evolution of human advancement, which is what we work on at the World Bank. This person that wrote this is from the World Bank. Development. So, yeah, it's like you got the lower income people, or you have the peasants, as they were once called, striving to become more like the rich because they like what they've seen. So they've kind of formed a lifestyle within a lifestyle. I don't know how many people saw the movie Coming to America with Eddie Murphy, but in that movie you have John Amos, who plays the guy that owns this restaurant called McDuff's or something like that. I forget the exact name of the restaurant, but it's patterned after McDonald's. Well, Eddie Murphy come from a very rich, affluent family that owned property, and his dad was like a king of Africa or something. So he's in America now. And McDowell's, that's what it was. McDowell's. So when the dad that owns that restaurant chain says to Eddie Murphy, he says, in a small house that he owns, which is sort of like a mini mansion, he says, yeah, with some hard work and 20 or 30 years down the road, you could probably own something extravagant like this. Well, according to Eddie Murphy, that was nothing. That was just a poor place, sort of. But to the guy that owned those restaurants, to him, that was a mansion. So when you take people that want to become middle class or closer to the rich than they were before, you create a whole different class of people now. So what happens to the poor when the poor are in a city and the city becomes too rich for them to live there? Well, used to, you had the poor, which were in the inner city. Now you've got cities that are enticing people to move to the city, rich people. Seattle, you guys are doing that now. And you're pushing the poor people out into neighborhoods that nobody wants and nobody thinks they can do anything with. But as soon as they find out that you can do something with that area, the rich are going to take that over too. And before you know it, you're going to be ass out. I wish it was different, but that's just the way it is. If you know anything about what I'm talking about, put it in a comment below. If you have an idea for a better video, please give me an idea for that, and I will do the best I can to do a video on it. Give me a thumbs up. Also hit the subscribe button. It's just like right underneath this video, like right underneath the video it says subscribe. I'm going to let you go on that note. This has been All Things Considered. Have a good night, Seattle, America, and all points beyond.